Good day. Hello, my name is Paul Sims and I'm chairman at eyeforpharma, calling you today from London. And I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar. It's entitled The PSP Masterclass, How Health Psychology Drives Winning Patient Support Programs. And it's actually proven to be a very popular webinar. We have approximately 1,300 people signed up, and I can see that a lot of you are already signed in, so I appreciate you being here on time. Absolutely delighted that you could join us today. Also would like to say a big thank you to Ashfield, who've been instrumental in designing and creating today's webinar. And without their support, we couldn't have managed to create it. So really appreciate their help in getting us to where we are. Now, what's the reason why we put this webinar on? Well, obviously it's popular, but I suppose the original motivation was a feeling that patient support programs, whilst becoming quite commonplace, are also not necessarily exploring their full potential to be actually quite transformational. But we have seen that when some real smart approach to design is actually taken, that their potential and what they can actually do in terms of providing value, providing insights, providing ultimately better outcomes for patients is really quite significant. And if we can do one step better than that even, and to actually take a psychology first approach, actually considering that, then we can make a significant difference. And actually today's webinar, as you'll see in a moment, we've brought a health psychologist into the conversation to make sure that we can indeed get to where we need to be. So if you look at your slide, then you should be able to see that I'm joined by four very qualified ladies today, and the first of which in the top left of your screen is Anna Maria Ardabella, and she's Director of European Operations and Patient Solutions at Teva. She has actually an extensive experience designing and implementing effective actions impacting patient health and pharma business across Europe, and she's done a huge amount of work there. Hard to think of anyone more qualified really for this conversation. Nagore is responsible for strategy and execution of clinical and patient services for Ashfield within Europe and Canada. She's an experienced leader with over 10 years experience in international program management, clinical operations, quality and compliance. And I believe she also, I've asked all of the panelists to name something that they do in their personal lives. Nagore is a keen dancer of the Argentinian tango. Unfortunately, we won't be able to witness that on our webinar today. You'll just have to take my word. Anna Baker is a consultant health psychologist with a PhD in health psychology, and indeed will be talking to us from that angle today. She's also a cognitive behavioral therapist specializing in disease management, medication adherence, and behavior change. And she, by the way, is a keen endurance runner, so we have a very active group today. And Emily, certainly last but not least, is responsible for leading and managing all US-based reimbursement, health policy, and patient support programs for farming. She specializes in developing strategies and tactics to increase both access and adherence for patients. She's a keen disc golf player and bike rider, and she loves to travel also. So as you can see, we have a fantastic lineup for you today. And indeed, the first thing that we're going to do is to ask Nagore and Anna from Ashfield to show us through a few slides, which is going to introduce our topic today. So I shall hand over to the both of you now. Thank you.
So before looking at what health psychology is and how it drives winning patient support programs, it's worth spending 1 minute to reflect on what the problem is or has been until now with some of the heritage or traditional patient support programs, or PSPs as we call them. So the two common reasons why some PSPs have failed is due to the fact that in order to tackle non-adherence, they've been designed with a one-size-fits-all approach. So they may have focused on forgetfulness or fear of side effects and how to tackle those as drivers of non-adherence. The other reason is that interventions may have been designed purely to educate or train people on, for example, how to inject appropriately, or what a disease is, or what a medication is used for. I mean, don't get me wrong, these two reminders and education are of course important, but they're not the full picture, and hence why health psychology comes into play. But what is it? Let me introduce you to Anna, our expert in health psychology, to look at some of the key concepts. Anna?
Thank you, Nagore. So what I'm going to start with today is just introduce what health psychology is, and I'm sure that some people will know what health psychology is, but for those of you who don't, it's basically the study of human behavior around health. So that can be any aspect about around chronic disease or anything associated with this. So what do we do from a health psychology perspective? Well, we look at all those factors that impact on a patient's well-being, look at their ability to self-manage their condition, and look at their overall emotional well-being. So this goes beyond just their behaviors. It's about really understanding their thinking, their feeling, and their motivations, and finding out what impact those have. Now, how do we use this information? Well, firstly, we take two different approaches. We'll take a scientific approach. We will look at the evidence that's published. We will also look at patient insights research, but we'll also use our clinical practice experience to ensure that we can really engage with patients. So why are we doing this? Well, ultimately, this is about moving beyond the biomedical model of health and looking at all of those factors, as I've said, that are relevant. The aim here is really to empower patients to better understand and be able to self-manage both the physical and psychological aspects in tandem. So this is a really brief overview of what health psychology is. And I'll pass back to Nagore, who will talk about some examples of how we've been applying it.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks very much for the intro to health psychology. So with this academic concept in mind, we can now see how we can embed the principles and science of health psychology into the design and certainly the delivery of PSPs. So first of all, research. So research is very important, and for us it precedes any good PSP design. So patients may be not conscious of the reasons for their own non-adherence, and by using health psychology we can dig into the reasons of what, how, and why patients are behaving in a particular way. And this is important because of course we will use this in this knowledge to design those PSPs that we're going to construct and the interventions, etc. Interventions, of course, we want to make sure we are maximizing the resources from our clients, so we must make the most of each and every intervention so that we can give patients the best chance to, of course, manage the medication and certainly, most of all, bring about lasting positive change, which is one of the main drivers to have these PSPs in place. So health psychology enables us to take a whole patient approach and look at both physical and psychological aspects. So both in tandem are important. And the third one, nurse training. So embedding health psychology techniques in nurse training enables us to drive behavioral change from an end-to-end perspective, and of course create meaningful relationships or relations to drive better outcomes. So actually we will see in detail some of these techniques later with Anna. So Anna, handing to you over to expand on some of the work we've done on the research arena. There you are.
Thank you. So just to start off with research, and I spoke about how we use published research, but how do we use this in a meaningful way? When we have been doing investigations and we've been speaking to experts, we found that actually there aren't a lot of tools out there that are suitable to be used for enabling tailoring or personalization of interventions. So what we've done at Ashfield is we've developed a tool that we use in order to tailor our content, but also tailor our messages that we might be giving nurses and discussing with patients. This is fundamentally an evidence-based tool, so we've carried out a range of literature reviews. We've also done patient insights research, but we've also, as I said, spoken to experts in the behavior change theory field. So we're very confident in the tool that we've been developed. Now, how is this tool going to work? Well, it works in different ways. One, it needs to be a tool that can be completed by patients easily, but it also has to be something that nurses can use in their everyday practice. So we've identified those specific risk factors that we feel are important in driving patient adherence. So it really targets those barriers to non-adherence. Nagori, is there anything I may have forgotten there when I'm talking about our tools?
Yes, well, I think I can add that this tool enables us to segment or profile patients and drive specific care plans for them. So you may have a low risk patient for which some interventions are designed, or you may have a high risk patient for which, you know, different interventions, more high touch or high level are implemented. So it's a tool that enables us to tailor, which is really good on the field and into the design process. Thank you, Anna. So as an organization, if you decide to embed health psychology principles in your program, it should disseminate and will disseminate across all the channels. So this is, of course, in person through the human interventions that we may design, depending on the therapy area. And this is, of course, in the contact center or with the health coaches and within the visits, or nurse home visits, if there is one. Secondly, through all the digital channels, so websites, social media, emails that patients may receive, or content through the mobile apps. And of course, the third one is through print mailings, diaries, or any other education tool that we may use, depending on patient preference, etc. In actual fact, one of the key principles is that rather than just educating or training by providing facts, we are creating tools that empower people to take ownership, drive self-management, overcome barriers, set goals, and overall drive that positive change or behaviors that we were talking earlier. And this is, you can see here an example in these mobiles, and you can see on the left hand side some of the questions. So what might get in your way of taking your medicines as prescribed? How can you avoid or overcome these challenges? Once you've tried, think about how well it worked for you. These are all self-help support systems or materials that provide patients with the ability to change that behavior or think about the behavior, and rather than just getting information which is not gonna perhaps change that behavior. So what is nice about this type of interventions is that also in between the agreed human or nurse interventions, such as calls, visits, you're still keeping close to the patient. And that intimacy and closeness is key for the duration of the program. In real fact, we must remember that, you know, interventions are effective, most effective for the first 6 months, 3 months, 6 months of initiating therapy. So it's a factor to take into consideration. So I'm just going to hand over to you, Anna, to talk about what we do in nurse training.
Thank you. So this is really to just finish up, and this is just an illustration. So some of you may be saying, well, this is a high-touch approach to supporting patients. This isn't the only way we can support patients, but it's an interesting way where we can actually integrate specific techniques into the training we're offering nurses. Now, why are we doing this? Well, this is about enhancing the nurse-patient relationship or any healthcare professional, but it also is about efficiencies and effectiveness at the same time. So we've done this on a number of programs, and I'm just going to talk you very briefly through 3 of the different approaches or techniques that we have used. So we use behavior change techniques. So this is about training nurses on skills that they work and use with their patients. So this might include goal setting, action planning, problem solving, but it also might be about monitoring and giving feedback to patients or enhancing social support. And we use these because there's a really strong evidence base that these work in effective interventions. We also might be looking at the wider holistic approach to the patient. So this is looking beyond the physical aspect. And we know from many chronic diseases that emotional well-being can act as a barrier, particularly in self-management. So we would employ cognitive behavioral techniques. So this may be about things around mindfulness, We sometimes may use acceptance and commitment or cognitive restructuring. So this is really about helping patients to deal with those unhelpful thinking patterns that may be acting as those barriers. And finally, and this isn't an exhaustive list, we also would do training around motivational interviewing. And I'm sure many of you have used this or heard of this, but we need to be really careful that when we're training nurses to have more advanced communication skills, to be able to deal with ambivalence from patients or patients who are resistant to change, we need to ensure that we're giving nurses the right message to have this open discussion. Now, these aren't the only 3 different approaches or techniques that we use, but it is an illustration of how we can advance nurse training. And we've got some really, really positive feedback from nurses in terms of how this is enhancing their relationship, patients are engaging, and even sometimes in terms of patient retention, it's just having that conversation which makes a difference. So I'm just going to finish there. I don't know, Nagori, if you've got anything else to add before we hand back to Paul.
Well, just to say that you've seen, thanks for listening, first of all, and then you've seen here a range of ways of how we can embed health psychology, from research to interventions to training, etc. And this makes a difference to programs, and it's something that is now widely applied not only to health, but is applied to other behavior change, and psychology is applied to other industries as well. And we think it makes a difference in patient support programs. So thanks for listening.
Okay, this is very interesting. I was planning to move on to the next section of the webinar, but I'm getting a lot of questions in, and so I sort of feel like I should hover here just for a moment. Quite a few questions about the nature of the NARA tool. Is it appropriate for any chronic disease or therapy? Is it sort of validated academic tool? I'm not entirely sure what a validated academic tool means, but maybe you might have an idea. And a lot of questions about the objectives of the tool and what it's used for. Any sort of further information around that?
Sure. Anna, I think you can help me on this one, of course. But so
I'll follow you up.
Yeah, so the tool is validated, is based on academic research, and it fills some gaps that we've seen in the market in regards to tools that are out there for assessing adherence mainly. So it goes beyond that. It is tailored to each therapy area, so there is some aspects that will be the same across therapies, because they are human behavior related matters, and there are some others that will be tailored or are tailored for a specific therapy area. It's not the same to, as Anna Maria was saying, it's not the same if you are talking about an oral medication than if it's an injectable medication or a chronic illness, more mass market illness against a rare disease one. So it is tailored. Anna, do you want to add anything else in terms of the research and the methodology?
Yeah. So, I mean, we have obviously used the research, but we have used a range of behavioural experts here in the UK who specialise in behaviour change techniques and behaviour change theory. So we have an initial framework. Now, in terms of validation, I don't want to give everyone a statistical lecture here, but there are lots of different ways. So in one case study, we have validated through nurses using it with their patients, and we have been making changes and alterations and testing it. But it is something that we would discuss with clients in terms of the level of validation. So whether they want to do a more complex validation where there's large numbers of participants, and we might be looking for, is this suitable for going for publication? So there are lots of options, and it depends in terms of the level of credibility, how it's going to be used, and it also depends on budget in terms of how many validation processes we will be using.
Okay, sorry to interrupt you guys. We could carry on this conversation. We've got loads and loads of questions. What I think might be a smart idea, just because it's nearly past already and we need to get into the next chapters of this webinar, perhaps if I could share some of the questions, or maybe even all of the questions that we've received on those slides specifically with you, Nagore and Anna, maybe you could post-event perhaps write down a few answers and we could share them with everybody. Would that be a good idea?
That's a great idea.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so what I want to do is to quickly have the audience getting involved in a slightly different way. Take a look at your screen, if you don't mind. You should see something appearing on the screen. Thank you. Currently, is your company making an effort to include behavioral or health psychology into patient support programs? So this is just an attempt to find out where the audience is right now, how widely adopted this are. This is obviously, as I said, we have a really good audience today, so this information should be statistically quite useful. So I'll hold that open for a few more seconds. You can see I've given you two options with yes. Yes, it's considered and adopted, but yes, it's considered but actually rarely included. No, we're not yet this sophisticated, or no, we're not running patient support programs at all. So I'll hold that open 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much. Got nearly all of you voting there, which is fantastic. Let's have a look at the results. Okay, so we've got actually a clear winner, which is very nice to see. It's a third of you saying that you're actually adopting them right now, but a good 30, nearly a third on the rarely included, 20% on not yet sophisticated, and 16 on don't run PSPs right now. So some interesting things there. Perhaps I could bring in one or two of our other panelists. Emily, we've not heard from you yet. Any thoughts on this and how you perhaps would have voted? Emily, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Just a second. Are you muted? Yes, you're still muted at your end, Emily. Okay, I'm afraid we can't hear Emily at the moment.
I can speak in the meantime, if you would like me, Paul.
Yes, go.
So I think it's an interesting answer. And I think this basically correlates with what we are seeing as Ashfield. So on the question, on the response, yes, it is considered but rarely included. I mean, this is a hot topic now. I mean, and health psychology is not just used in the health industry. It's started to be used everywhere else. And it's not strange that people are considering it, they're thinking about it, they are looking at ways of improving heritage patient support programs, etc. So it's really, really good to see that this is a hot topic right now, and we are talking to clients about this all the time. So it should be the norm in the in the next few years and in the present. So good to see.
Okay, Emily, sorry, go on. We still, sorry, Emily, you're still muted, I'm afraid, even though you say you're not. You are, unfortunately.
Shall I speak? Is that
Anna
here? I was just going to say it's interesting sometimes when you look at patient support programs which are maybe saying that they're using a health psychology approach, and it's understanding is the health psychology approach being used at all levels, from initial pitch to foundation, also in terms of the delivery, any backup, and when you're reviewing it, so even if you're not doing an evaluation, which I know we're going to speak about later on, can you be confident that you are using it as it should be used, so that you are getting value for money, you're getting the best out of your programs. And, in a way, I'm interested in people's perspectives, whether they are confident that they are using it in the most sort of robust and efficient way that it could be.
Okay. What I'm going to do, because we've got quite a few of these polls to ask, is actually move straight on to the next one. So take a look at your screens once again, everybody, and you should see another question appearing. What's your company's greatest motivation today for running patient support programs? So here we've got 5 answers: to boost revenues through direct sales, to boost revenues through patient adherence, and I realize that I've been very
sort of emphasizing the revenue aspect of that. But let's talk about the ultimate benefit, I suppose. To add or demonstrate value in access and reimbursement submissions, if that's the real motivator. To boost insights into patient behavior and provide support, that's perhaps the more long-term option, to try and use this as a learning opportunity as the primary motivation. Or finally, we're not actually running any PSPs, similar to my question previously. So I can see about half of you have voted so far. I'll hold that open another 5 seconds. Let's get those votes in, please. I can see a few people saying, well, how about helping patients? That's really supposed to be the fourth option on the list there, to boost insights into patients' favor and provide support to patients. I'm afraid I ran out of characters on that answer, so I couldn't state the word patients, but I think you can see my intentions there. So 2 more seconds. 2, 1. Let's have a look at the results. Thank you, everyone. So, we're not looking at direct sales, are we? Only 4% there. Nearly a third of people on the adherence side of things, which I suppose is perhaps what we might have expected. Slightly less than I might have expected on the value in access and reimbursement submissions, but still 14% saying that's the primary motivation. Boost insights into patient behavior, so people doing this for authentic reasons, perhaps we could say, with 36, or of course similar percentage before, saying they're not running them at the moment. Interesting results. Any comment on that from our panel?
When I'm saying this, I'm thinking that sometimes in the companies it is difficult to have all the stakeholders align the same perception of value of a PSP, of why we're doing a PSP. So sometimes it takes a lot of time to really have this patient-centricity value or this patient behavior insight value within all the stakeholders. And it is really where we have to go in pharma.
This is Nagore. I totally agree with I totally agree with Anna from Teva. And actually, this reflects on who the stakeholders are when we speak about patient support programs to clients. So sometimes we are speaking to brand teams, most of the time. Sometimes we're speaking to patient solutions teams like Anna's team in Teva. Or sometimes we are even talking to a joint up group, which is, there is market access, there is brand team, there is patient solutions. So, and we're starting to see a much more patient-centric joint approach from pharma. So it's not just one of these that is relevant. It's a combination, patient-centric, of course, providing support, but also making sure that these programs are leveraging other aspects as well.
Yes, I think it's refreshing that people are saying, that it is about patient support. I agree, it's about getting stakeholders involved. I really believe that if you have happy patients who are able to change, then you will boost direct sales, you will get greater adherence. So in a way, that's about how you're selling your message, your interventions, your patient support from day one, and say it is beneficial to all stakeholders in different ways.
Okay, any further comments? No? Okay. Let me come to the audience, as the audience has been very active and kindly asking a few things while we've been looking at these polls. So, where do I start? I think one has to balance between cost of the program and cost of losing a patient. Despite the cost of the program, it could compensate the cost of losing the patient due to non-adherence. How do you see telehealth fitting into patient support programs? As that's not something that we've really focused on yet. Can we focus on regulatory issues, particularly in the US? Wondering about call centers where nurses are expected to stay on a regulatory approved script. How does that work? How do you qualify the level of adherence to patients on a PSP? Lots of questions about measurement, actually. We might come to that in a moment, but let's focus on some of the other more practical questions first. Does anybody want to take any of those that I've just mentioned?
I could jump in and talk about US regs. I was just going to say that we have worked with US markets where we have developed health psychology embedded nurse call scripts, and it's about making sure that you're working with all the team members, because quite often it's language around medicine that you need to get right, but you can still embed techniques, behavioural strategies, etc. So it is possible, but it means you need to get your med regs teams involved early on. You need to make sure that there's approvals at every stage. And it's about getting writers that understand the regulatory issues as well, so they can actually avoid issues coming up, and this can save time and this can save money. It is definitely possible to do. It is hard work to do, and you have to go through lots of hoops. But as long as you have everybody involved from the start, I don't see a problem in doing it.
Okay, any other comments on that?
I was going to say there was a question about telehealth. Sorry, Paul, there was a question about telehealth. I'm not sure if they are referring to video consultations that we may be having with patients, etc. If that's the case, it's totally doable, and we are doing this in a lot of programs. So certainly for regions like the US, where extensive regions, patients everywhere in very remote locations, it's something that we do very commonly.
Excellent. Okay. I am going to move on to another question for the audience in that case. So take another look at your screens, everybody. For what reasons do you not currently offer emotional and psychological support to patients? And in fact, the first option, of course, there is actually we do offer it already, so feel free to click on that one if that's where you believe that you are right now. But also 4 more reasons why this might indeed be a barrier right now. Legal regulatory compliance. We don't have the skills, capabilities, or even the third-party support doesn't exist for us at the moment. We don't understand the patient needs or the possible solutions that we could offer. Or finally, we rely on others in the community to provide this support. So let's hold this question open for a few more seconds, if that's all right with you. Okay, so let's hold that open another second and let's see what the results are. Here we go. Okay, so 26% on actually we do offer it already. That's promising, over a quarter. Just 24.5% saying we don't understand the patient needs. And finally, we rely on others is actually quite a significant amount there for providing that kind of support. So again, I don't know if that's what our panelists might have expected. Anne-Marie, I'm keen to hear your opinion on this.
Well, it's interesting. Well, there's a very low percentage on we don't understand the patient needs. So it's clear that there's a common interest in understanding what's happening outside, what's happening with your patients, what are the drivers or their needs or beliefs or the barriers for them to do the treatment as the doctors are suggesting or telling them. So the rest is quite balanced. In fact, I understand that in many companies internally, sometimes there are a lot of challenges to complete the operation of our PSP. So these legal regulation and compliance issues might be coming from that. And we rely on the community to provide this support. Also, it's important to work with patient associations and work with them support. So I think this has to be included as well.
Okay, any further comments?
I think it's interesting we don't have the skills or capabilities. I think one thing needs to be clear, and it's very important that if you are offering emotional psychological support, that you have the experts who can guide you, so you know when you have to signpost onto other services, whether that be in the community or with local health services. But I think within patient support programs, there definitely is a role for emotional well-being, and we know this from the evidence base around most diseases. So in a way, we might not be dealing with severe clinical issues, which wouldn't be in the remit, but it's about looking at those factors which might be related to adherence or ability to self-manage, or just patients' general quality of life. So it is essential to do, but it needs to be done by people who really understand and have the expertise. So having professionals who are regulated within their own professional body is key on this.
Thank you, Anna.
Well, one thing I would say, Paul, is I know the question is specifically on emotional and psychological support, but earlier we were saying how psychology can be embedded in all channels, from content, websites, to apps, to the face-to-face support, etc. I would challenge clients to look at and audit the websites, the communication tools, what they're using with patients, etc., and the vendors as well, to make sure that it is embedded. If it's part of what they want to offer, to make sure that this is embedded in all the channels.
Thank you. I've got a few audience questions coming in, which I really appreciate, and do keep them rolling in. I've got a couple actually from patients. Heidi Floyd, hello. I'm listening as a patient and advocate. I find this to be a very helpful discussion. Loving that the desire for patient insights and to provide support is so prominent. It's absolutely wonderful to hear. So that's always good to see. A lot of people also asking about cost barriers still. I know that I mentioned that at the beginning of this conversation, but people seem very concerned about the level here that we're talking about and the ROI that might be coming as a result. So I think we perhaps need a little bit more lucidity on that if possible. And really a couple more questions about whether or not the psychological support also includes things like health coaching, etc., and whether or not these kind of support services are included. So I'm not sure if anyone has any comments on any of those.
Well, regarding the cost question, I think that understanding what is or personalizing the intervention might also help you to control the cost, because you will be giving to each one what the person needs and not everything. So that's a good way also to control the cost. And also creating a good strategy at the beginning is also key for having a good cost structure, because it's not the same to create a PSP for a chronic disease than to acute, to a rare disease, than to diabetes. So depending when you create your strategy, if you understand really the challenges of the patient, also of the healthcare professionals and the carers, and you create your strategy depending on that, you might do the best with your budget.
And I think it's also... Oh, no, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Just to add on that, Hannah, thanks for letting me. We sometimes, we know how much clients spend in R&D and in the commercial models, yeah, so wanting to market access even, as the amount of money spent on that. And then it's always, I'm always curious to understand as well from clients, how is it that they want to spend very little on the actual, the usage, how it is used, the making people happier using the medicine or making people more adherent to the medicine. And as Ana Maria was saying, it totally depends on the strategy, whether this is a mass market drug or an orphan drug, which is, high high value but low volume, etc. And the approaches are very, very different with each of these different types of molecules. So thinking that beforehand at pre-launch stage is key, and embedding it onto the brand plan pre-launch is key, because otherwise you run onto delivering perhaps just an add-on PSP quickly after launch, because it's, the molecule is launching in 3 months. And that's, I think, paramount for a good, winning patient support program.
Yeah, this is Emily. I agree. I do think from a cost perspective, you have to weigh it out. But I know internally in my experience, I've had to be able to do into education to different folks within, whether it's marketing, and really try to integrate our strategies together to say, you've got your digital CRM that you're trying to communicate with patients, but let's try to support each other and, not just, doing your marketing piece in your silo and my patient support program kind of in mind, but that really working together, because the goals are the same. The goals are to communicate with them, make sure they have not only the disease awareness, but they have the understanding about the benefits of the product, but hopefully keep them engaged long term, which will at the end of the day impact adherence. And I think that question around ROI is a question that while I think legal folks may cringe, because in the U.S. I know there's some strict rules around using patient support programs to increase sales. At the end of the day, the focus is on the patient, and to make sure that the patient is able to stay on their therapy as their doctors prescribed. I think that your conversations, not only around budget and really partnering with other stakeholders within your organization, will be more successful, but I also think your legal and your compliance teams will understand why you're doing what you're doing, and that, yes, we need to be looking at the whole patient. We shouldn't just be focusing on coverage, and we can't just focus on training. Let's say if you need to train, there's more to a patient, and to integrate those small pieces, I think, is something that's viable. It's viable if you can, put the rationale together and get a budget secured.
Thank you, Emily.
What I was going to say is,
carry on.
I was just going to add a point. I expect there's a lot of people who are on the call who have invested heavily in existing programs. One of the case studies we've used was a program which had been developed, and we've actually been working on nurse call script, and it's about enhancing this. So it's not about wasting the investment that's already there. So it may be about doing an audit of current patient support interventions and seeing are there any gaps there, and just looking at how these could be enhanced or improved rather than starting again from scratch, particularly if you're talking about drugs that have been existing on the market for a long time. So it's not that we're saying it's new drugs coming to market where this should only be used. It's about looking at what's already existing at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's the first.
And I was just going to add one point. Yes, you can include health coaching. I only included 3 sort of specific angles of health psychology, but we would also use things from counseling, from clinical psychology, so, social psychology. So it's really looking at patient needs, what we want to target, and then we would look at the sort of psychological support around that.
Okay, I was going to intervene there because we were talking about whether or not existing products could adopt this, etc. And I'm very interested in the question of at what point, about timing really, about what point should PSPs be considered, whether or not it should be something early phase, obviously talking about new products here. And I'd really like to get the audience comments on what would be the ideal phase. So if you wouldn't mind writing in any further thoughts you've got on that. But one way of quickly canvassing your opinion is, of course, to ask you another question. So I'm going to do that right now. At what point in the product life cycle do you consider it vital to be making concrete plans for your PSPs? Is it right at the very beginning? Is it early development? Is it phase 1, phase 2 stage? Is it late clinical where actually a bit more realism can be organized and we're not going to be wasting our investment? Phase 3A, 3B, even phase 4, which of course is around launch phase, which is the next option. And then finally, post-launch when triggered by a market need. So we should be more reactive with our PSPs. We shouldn't necessarily just do them as a standard part of the operation. So I'll hold that open for a few more seconds. I think this would be a very interesting one to get your opinions on. So let's see. We've got about 40% of votes in. Keep them coming. I'll hold open for 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's have a look at the results yet again. And actually, it's around, well, the middle. But the significant minorities either side, I have to say. Some people think the earlier the better. Some people think that we shouldn't be designing them as standard. Nagori, I'm very interested to hear your opinion on this, given your experience deeper down in the product life cycle.
Yes. So for me, late clinical, certainly earlier than launch phase. So launch phase it may vary, the period of when you're getting your EMA approval or FDA, whatever. So late clinical would be in the last stages when, those brand plans are getting shaped for the market access strategies, etc. At that point is where they should be looked at, and they should have a specific section for, the topic. And as I say, it touches most of the stakeholders. So from medical, pharmacovigilance, certainly for specific diseases where you need to monitor the risk ratio when going into market, and of course patient solutions teams, brand managers, etc. So that's my view. Early development, that's I think too early perhaps, because you are yet not knowing if your molecule is going to be successful. And post-launch, although we've seen a lot being done post-launch, my suggestion is that that's sometimes a little bit too late. I mean, some clients have waited until post-launch, and they've realized that side effects are making that, the drug is people are leaving and they're not taking their medication or switching very early after a couple of months or a month of treatment. And that's slightly too late because, of course you can make an effect and have an impact, but the earliest, the better.
Okay, a couple of audience comments just before the other panelists jump in. PSPs can start at the extension studies that go on from phase 2B. This is from Mervyn Ward. If we can get to discuss teams and understand patients better at that stage, we can definitely develop PSPs to be available at launch. Fabio Fortune Funato says that if the companies do not consider patients' journeys answers in the process, it makes no sense to create a patient support program at all, and believe it or not, many companies still do it. And Laura Southwell asks, how long do Ashfield and the others believe is actually needed for the design phase of a PSP? How long should it actually take to create in the first place, and how much investment is needed at that stage? I guess it's another form of investment question. Go for it.
I was just going to comment on that exactly, because it's if you think that creating a PSP will take you at least 6 months if you really do the research and really prepare the PSP, and then it's, after that, if you want to localize to each of your countries, it will take longer than that. So consider or planning in your project plan at least 9 to 12 months to have a project developed and adapted to all the countries. So if you consider that and you start just at the launch phase, it won't give you time to prepare, localize, and also communicate with your HCPs, because they need to understand what is going to happen, and also you need to listen to them as well and include their feedback into your program. So I would suggest always to think and give time for this project to happen before the launch.
And this is Emily. I just wanted to... Okay.
Just to add a point.
Emily, go for it.
I'm so sorry. I was just going to add, from a real-life perspective of launching various patient programs, I haven't always had the luxury of really doing that kind of early on in that ideal time frame, phase 3, kind of prior to launch. A lot of the times we're taking market research and trying to best understand the patient journey and then put together what we know have worked in the past in terms of support and adherence. But I would call it adherence light, maybe through phone calls and adherence calls or refill reminders. I would say that now we've had the experience through our nurses, and I'm just speaking personally, where, our program has actually evolved. It's not just kind of one time in place or the first, year before you launch. We are several years actually post-launch. And the more that we are meeting with our patients, talking with our patients, understanding their needs, seeing how their needs vary, even culturally within the U.S., based on location or age, we continue to grow and develop and create more and more ways to support our patients and better understand those behavioral drivers, their belief systems, and some of those psychosocial needs that we had missed. Really at launch, I think we made a lot of assumptions on what we thought was going to happen, but then as we meet patients, it's so different. And so we are having to continue to segment and to divide and conquer as to how we can really come up with interventions that are meaningful in a way that the patients will continue to appreciate and understand without it look like we're coming in with an agenda when we're talking with them, right, to keep them engaged and active in their care. So I would just say for those of you who are joining who have not done this yet and you've already launched, it's not too late. Really, we continue to learn every day and continue to develop and create options.
Indeed, and a few audience members saying, echoing really what you've just said there in terms of it's never too late to start, and also never too late to start in terms of later in the phase. Susan Hundley saying we've seen a lot of success even in older programs closer to the end of the life cycle. Okay, I've got a couple more questions, and we're pretty much out of time, I'm afraid. But just one more question I think we've got time for. What shall I choose? So many options. What about when PSPs are most effective for patients? This is Alex Hope's question. When could we hear about? I think we heard earlier that they're most effective in the first 6 months after diagnosis, and is that supported by evidence? Is the question. So anybody like to take that?
I know from our perspective, and this is Emily, we've had, the patients that we were able to engage, keep them engaged, develop relationships with, really the first 90 to 120 days, we've been able to keep those patients longer, much longer and longer term, and to really help have an impact on their, how active they are in their own care. We have found that, and that could be still we're working through coverage and working through prior auths or denials or getting them trained and just really focusing on some of the clinical and functional needs even right out of the gate. So I would say even if you don't deploy kind of all of the psychosocial or behavioral type of supports right out of the gate, it is, from the time the doctor prescribes to the time you start meeting with that patient and keeping them engaged is extremely important. So, I would say even the first 120 days will be a predictor as to how long the patient, you'll be able to keep that patient in relationship.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, it depends what you want to change. You can change behavior fairly quickly, but it's whether you can sustain that behavior change. But if you forget patient thinking patterns, their knowledge, their feelings, you leave those behind, then actually people will stop doing what they've changed. So it takes longer to change people's beliefs than it sometimes takes to do an initial change in behavior. So I think you need to map out what needs to be changed in order to facilitate long-term behavior change and maintenance.
Thank you. Nagori, any final comment from you?
Yeah, it depends also on therapy area, and it depends also on what the medication is, etc., and side effects and the patient life cycle, really, the pathway. So, but I agree with Emily. From our experience, clinical experience in these programs, the first 3 to 6 months, 3 months are quite, they can be more effective than leaving it for when somebody's already been in the drug for ages or having longer projects that with more interventions. It just depends, but it's just our experience from clinical practice.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you. And we've gone a couple of minutes over already, so I apologize for anyone who has to dash off, but I really appreciate it. I think it's been something of a breathless conversation with so many different angles and facets to consider. And I tell you, my computer screen is full of all sorts of disparate questions over here that it's quite tricky to almost get a handle on. So what I propose is what I said earlier on. Let's take some of those questions. Perhaps we can ask any of our panelists that might have the availability to do so to write some comments and answers to those questions. We can perhaps distribute them on a PDF format or similar afterwards. Obviously, I want to say a huge thank you to Anna Maria, to Emily, who finally managed to get on board towards the end. They're really glad that you managed to come in. And then in particular to our two Ashfield members who also helped so much with the organisation of today and getting this all right. I can see that we've still got a large number of people on the line, so it's clearly been an interesting conversation for you, and really hope that we can continue that conversation. You might notice at the very bottom of your screen there's a couple of events that we've got planned there, where if you liked what you had to say and want to learn more, then please do come along. We'd love to see you in person. And then finally, if you've got any other final questions, comments, suggestions, that burning things that we didn't manage to get to, then do write them down, as we will be able to then include them in our response post-event. So I'll hold open the Q&A for a couple more minutes now and let you indeed ask anything that you wish to. Otherwise, I hope it's been useful. Thank you so much for staying, and really, really keen to continue this conversation as far as possible. Really appreciate your time, everybody. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and undoubtedly we will catch up soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.